Well, Canada is taking the lead when it comes to boosting energy production. They have plans in the works for a $5 billion expansion of its Trans Mountain pipeline. Now, that would triple their capacity to move oil to Canada's west coast. It's hoped the venture will allow them to expand business with Asia. Meanwhile, plans for the U.S. Keystone Pipeline not going anywhere, at least for now. So let's take a look at the project Canada is embarking on. Currently, the Keystone Pipeline stems from Canada and goes from the city of Hardisty in Alberta through Steel City and then splits in half, taking oil to Cushing, Oklahoma, as well as Patoka, Indiana. Now, here is the proposed plan for extensions to that pipeline. This plan is currently on hiatus since the U.S. State Department ordered a review of possible alternative routes to avoid the environmentally sensitive Sandhill regions of Nebraska. Instead, the Kinder Morgan Pipeline Company is planning to build $5 billion to nearly triple the capacity of its Trans Mountain pipeline, like I said earlier, that carries crude oil from Alberta oil sands to tankers in Vancouver. So, why is Canada able to pull it off, but the U.S. is stalled? To discuss this and more, I'm joined now by Ronald Bailey, author of the book Liberation Biology. Welcome to the show, Ronald. First, I want to start off by talking about the significance of this pipeline that Canada is embarking on and what it will give them the capacity to do.
Well, what happened, as you pointed out, is that the United States decided to delay the building of the Keystone Pipeline down from Canada, from Alberta to the Gulf Coast of the United States. The Canadians went basically, well, fine then. We need a market for our oil sands, and we're going to go find that market. And if you don't want it, the rest of the world will. So we will now build a pipeline to Vancouver, to British Columbia, and start exporting oil sands oil abroad. And if you Americans don't want it, China will want it, India will want it, the rest of the world will want it.
So it's kind of their way of saying, hey, we don't really need you. We can take our business elsewhere.
Correct.
But the reason why the pipeline here in the U.S. was kind of stalled, these environmental concerns. Right. They have halted the project from going through. Do you think it's possible that there is too much power from environmental lobbyists?
Well, basically what's happened is that a number of things. One is, yes, there is too much power in the Obama administration for environmental lobbyists. Basically, our president had to decide which particular constituency he was going to make angry. The environmental lobbyists, because he's coming into an election this year, or if he's going to make the unions, the people who would have constructed the pipeline, angry. And he decided he would get more votes by satisfying the environmental lobby. That's normal politics. That's what he decided to do. The problem is that his decision was based on very bad science and very bad economics. He justified it on the basis that it might harm the Ogallala aquifer in the center of the country if it should burst and so forth. And yet there's very little evidence that a great deal of harm would happen should the pipeline have a malfunction at some point. The other problem is the environmental lobby basically wants to try to isolate the oil sands. After all, the resource is enormous. It's 1.7 trillion barrels there, of which, using current technologies, you should be able to get out 170 billion barrels, which is second only to Saudi Arabia as a reserve. And they were trying to isolate it because they don't want this oil to be burned because of their concerns about global warming. Thus, they said, we will stop the pipeline, and the Canadians can't sell it to anybody. And now we see that that's not true. The Canadians are going, well, we don't have to sell it to America. We'll sell it to somebody else.
So you mentioned earlier how President Obama kind of decided to cater to a certain constituency, that constituency being the environmentalists. But now what we're seeing is gas prices going up. And it's election season, and high prices at the pump make for unhappy Americans, unhappy voters. So not a good formula for the president. Is there more pressure on him now to take action?
With regard to the Keystone Pipeline?
Yeah, if that's what needs to be done in terms of bringing those oil prices down.
I think that at that point he would then lose the environmental lobby. He's just going to have to take what's going on. But the truth of the matter is that the pipeline would not have been built in time to lower current prices of gasoline in the United States anyway. So in a certain sense, that doesn't matter. Of course, in the politics of the United States, people will try to draw that connection, but I think it's not a real one. Nevertheless, it is a strong symbolic connection because it does indicate that the president doesn't seem to be terribly worried about what's going to happen with fuel prices in the United States.
Okay, so talk a little bit more about, you said it wouldn't happen in time for us to see measurable prices right now at the pump anyways, but talk a little bit about what that oil pipeline in the U.S. would do for fuel prices, maybe in the long run then.
Well, in the long run, building it would have probably created about 25,000 permanent jobs, would have boosted our supplies by at least 1 million barrels a day of supply in the United States. We're already importing 2 million barrels a day from Canada, and eventually the idea is that by 2025 we would be importing from the oil sands area about 3.5 million. Essentially, that would de-link us from any need to import oil from the Middle East or places like Nigeria or Venezuela. As they put it, do we want to buy conflict oil, that is oil from the Middle East, or we want to buy ethical oil, that is oil from Canada? And I think the answer is we should have bought the oil from Canada. Now the rest of the world will be buying it.
Now, Canada, they are moving ahead with their very ambitious plan to expand, but the U.S. can't really pull it off. So why is it that we see such this vast difference in terms of, being able to get these big projects launched?
Well, again, and part of it is what's wonderful is if you go up to Canada, I've been to Canada and I've been to the oil sands area and I've reported from there and seen what's going on. It's an amazingly complicated yet clean and environmentally sound operation. I mean, think about it this way. Canadians would produce oil in a much cleaner, better way than places like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Nigeria or Angola or any of the other places we might get oil. So if you're really worried about the state of the environment, where oil is being produced, you would really differentially want it to be produced in Canada. Secondly, I think that our regulatory regime here is being very complicated now with regard to using fossil fuels. Our Environmental Protection Agency is moving regulations which are designed to reduce our consumption of carbon dioxide, or consumption of basically carbon fuels, dramatically, and so they are complicating the permitting process and so forth for getting these projects done. So that's part of what's stopping this.
So now, if Canada does take their business elsewhere, which it looks like that's what they're looking to do, I mean, what does that mean for us? Do we then lose out on Canada? That's where we get most of our oil.
Well, we'll have to bid for it the way the rest of the world did. It would have been a much more secure relationship between our two countries had we just been able to have that bilateral relationship. But now it puts Canadian oil into the more volatile, if you will, global oil market in a way that would otherwise not have been. And we miss out on the jobs that we would have gotten because of the extra oil being refined and moved to this country as well.
And these are all the issues that they've kind of contributed to the controversy surrounding this pipeline, the pros and cons around it. Some people saying this is what we need for our country, others saying, this is going to be devastating environmentally. Do you think here in the U.S. Issues like these are too politicized?
I agree that they're way too politicized. Part of what's happened in the United States is that we now pretend that our issues can be resolved through science, and that basically because we no longer believe much in our politicians, we don't believe much in our churchmen, we don't believe in our businessmen, basically we still believe in our scientists. What happens in these issues is we do politicize the science. In this particular case, the environmental community made all kinds of claims with regard to the environmental harms that would result from using these oil sands that are simply not scientifically backed up. But they had to make them in order to scare, if you will, certain parts of the population into opposing the pipeline.
Well, that is politics as at play, as we often see. Ronald, thank you very much for coming on the show and coming here to our studio. That was Ronald Bailey, author of the book, Liberation Biology.